I'm ready. I'm good. Sorry. I end up voting affirmative in this round, and I think it's because the negatives articulation of Nietzsche makes it difficult for you to sort of create a delineation between what they say they're doing, like when we modify our bodies, that could be a form of suffering. But in the same breath, you say it's also liberatory, was able to create change. And that's where your offense is coming from, is that they're trying to create change and trying and modify the world by creating empowerment, which creates endless cycles of suffering. But then you say things simultaneously that by embracing by using the resonance method in this way, we're able to break through that in order to be able to solve these forms of suffering, which means that it becomes a model of empowerment. So within that, there's sort of your articulation, it contradicts itself, because you say we should not be trying to free ourselves from this, and then simultaneously making those same sort of analysis. And then you say, on like the case debate, that we shouldn't say that all oppression is from one thing, and then on the critique you say resentment is the cause of all forms of oppression and things like that, which makes it difficult, because then the links that you're articulating for them, which I think you're doing a good job at sort of pointing out the links, are things that you're also sort of falling back into the same sort of pitfall of doing, which I think becomes problematic. And I think that in cross-examination, when she asks things like, well, what does it mean for people who are oppressed, or people who are going to be kicked, or things like that, or my partner, or stuff like that, and your answer should be like, one thing that you could do is to embrace those forms of suffering, because it's going to be inevitable. If you're not going to be kicked today, you'll be kicked tomorrow, you'll be discriminated for something else. And the problem is that if we think we could just modify our body and that would solve all of our problems, we're going to come up with new problems, and we're going to have an endless cycle of these forms of suffering. So yes, it is, these forms of oppression are bad, but we have to be able to realize that the world is inevitably going to be like that, and the only way to be able to get past that is to have that embrace, right? And so it's like when people who are called like faggot or something like that, instead of being like, I need to get people to stop calling me this, instead create a positive affirmation of that, right? That's how like words like bitch have been reclaimed and stuff like that, is by taking something that has been negative, embracing that suffering, and then turning that into a positive identity, and be like, yeah, people are going to think I'm different, and who cares? And let me go ahead and embrace that sort of stuff. And I think that the interaction between the two positions are actually really sort of interesting in this round, because you're able to sort of talk about the way, like, I like your articulations of how body modification can be a form of suffering, where people can then embrace that suffering through these sort of surgeries in order to modify their bodies, in order to be able to gender fucking be whatever it is that they want to be. At the same time, criticisms of transsexuality, where people feel that they need to modify their body in order to be the appropriate, so that way their sex aligns with their gender, is a way to also sort of realign sort of traditionalized gender tropes, right? If I feel like a female but I have the anatomy of a male, to say I could just like transmorph my body, and therefore all my disjunct between gender and sex is going to be solved, recreates that sort of same sort of gender hierarchy that bodies and sexes need to matter, and then creates other forms of violences where people don't necessarily fit in just because of transsexual politics. So you could get into some of those specific examples, but I think that having sort of an explanation of how saying, like, every time they say instead of saying your critique solves, it should be the critique turns the case, and they make the situation worse, which makes it impossible to escape. Because every time you say doing the critique solves for the app and solves for what we're talking about, you end up falling in the same pitfall that are the links, is where they're trying to solve for these problems, right? So you use that same sort of language. So when I look through the flow and I'm thinking through the course of the round, and you're pointing out the links, I'm not sure how it doesn't also apply to you, which then means that, why should I reject them for that if you're doing that same sort of analysis? And that argument should be made explicitly in the debate, that they are also trying to do those same sort of things. So it's not that I don't vote on that argument, but that argument makes it difficult for me to be able to understand how it applies to them and not you. What I do end up voting for, I do end up sort of voting on the essentialism terms, because the only argument is like, well, that's not what we've meant. But at the same point in time, you're then making essentialism type arguments elsewhere, and so this is the point where I have a clearly articulated disadvantage by the affirmative, that we shouldn't just sort of essentialize oppression, we shouldn't essentialize sex and gender. You seem to agree with that claim, but then don't really have a defense of like a couple of acts. You're like, well, we didn't really, in the one hour you're like, I didn't mean it like in terms of like, I just said, women and queers, but that's not, all that I meant. But throughout the debate, you're also sort of creating groups of feminism and saying like women as a stable category, and a lot of their arguments is that there's not a woman as a stable category, because there is no such thing as woman as such, and that becomes something that I could vote on that's distinct from the rest of the debate when the link stories get murky. If the link stories weren't murky, I think I'd have a much easier time of being able, the debate would be instead about voting on that, the debate would be about, should I care about people who are suffering and try and change that, or should I say that since those things are inevitable and this is a debate round so I can't change it, I should just learn to be okay with the world as it currently exists. And so that would then be a much different debate that puts the debate where I think you would want on the critique level, which is focusing on why we should not be trying to resolve impacts but being okay with our lives in the world as it exists currently. And then that would sort of take away their biggest piece of offense against the criticism, which is that we have to try and overcome suffering. And so on the app side, you in cross-examination push them a lot on the questions of like, how should we overcome suffering, right? Or like, what about these things that are really bad? What should we do about that? But that doesn't make your speech nearly as much as it should be. So in the world where the link stories aren't murky, I don't think you're doing a good enough job to sort of convince me that I should care about these things, right? I mean, I do care about these things. A lot of people will naturally care about these things, but in a debate round, you actually have to explain why is oppression bad? Why should we care about trans folk or people or queers or women or whomever, whatever unstable categories that you're identifying? Why should we care if these people face discrimination? Or why should I care if the two of you face discrimination, right? Why is that a bad thing, and why should I go out of my way to help you overcome that when it could be more beneficial if you just learn to embrace the suffering that exists? Because even if I stop someone from impressing you today, something else is going to happen to you tomorrow, right? And so, like, why should I engage in that sort of endless cycle? And I think you need to have a better description of that in relationship to the Nietzschean argument, because essentially the thesis is that suffering ought to be embraced. You don't embrace it, that's bad. And so your one argument that sort of is the permutation is that, well, body modifications could be suffering, it could be painful, but then outside of that, everything else is about how we have to be able to change and empower people. But you're not really doing a good job rhetorically at convincing me that I should care about it in a speech. You're much better, both of you are in cross-examination, sort of explaining, or getting it by asking those intuitive questions. So you just need at some point, like, in the 2AR or the 1AR or something like that, have like, now for 30 seconds, I'm going to explain to you why this is bad. Yeah?
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the reasons why, at least I didn't, kind of carry that through in my speech, because I was scared of, I don't know, I felt like the perm was powerful in this debate, so I was scared of, making that contradiction, but I guess, that contradiction was, already present even if I didn't push them on it anyways.
Right.
I guess
exactly.
I should have just done it,
Right, because you were making the we empower people argument, but you don't really impact out the we empower people argument much. So it's like, if you say that, all you've done now is just given them their link, but you haven't explained to me why I should care about that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, yeah, the perm is good, and I like the way the perm articulates and how it functions in this regards, because some people will do body modification for the pain. And I'm thinking about movies documentaries like Modify, where people like to elevate themselves above cooks to their skin, do all sorts of modifications to their body because they enjoy and get pleasure in the way that it stimulates pain. Right. S&M is another example where people embrace pain through that form of sexuality and stuff like that. So I think that is an argument. But if you're going to go both routes, you need to sort of impact out the other route, or not say, we're not trying to empower people, we're just trying to allow a situation where people can truly embrace suffering through things like body modification. So, if you're going to go both ways, impact out both ways or pick which way to go.
Do you think that we can separate out those parts of the debate and make that work though, separating out the perm, and then obviously that would work?
Yeah, you'd be even if. First, we're going to win that empowerment is the most important thing, right? That's really what your app is doing, right? That's the thesis. That's what your 1AC wants to say. Your 1AC does not want to say people should embrace suffering. Your 1AC is looking for ways to overcome it. So that should be your offense, because if you win that, you beat the critique. And then you'd be even if you don't buy that, our affirmative allows for a positive embrace of suffering through body modifications. That's our permutation, right? So you sequence it as an even if claim, and you put the part that they don't have access to as a reason for why they should be rejected. And so that would be the one I'd put first, would be your offense, and then the permutation becomes the even if type argument.
Okay, thank you for that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where were you on the perm and the alt?
In terms of, I think that you have a lot of arguments for why the permutation doesn't necessarily wouldn't be able to function because of the way that they are constantly in this process that doesn't allow them to fully embrace suffering, where they're even with the permutations trying to overcome things like losses. But it becomes hard for me, all those arguments are embedded in sort of why we shouldn't do things like overcome suffering and empowerment, and they're still trying to do that. And so when the links become murky and I see you doing sort of the same sort of things, the answers to the permutation become difficult, because it's sort of, those answers also sort of apply to negative advocacy. And so something you could do to avoid that, like some of it is just language slippage when you say we solve, right? That's not like, you might not mean it in that way, but that's just sort of the way the debate speak talks. And so if you frame the ballot as like, I'm not voting for you, right, but I'm voting against them, then it doesn't matter if you happen to slip and you happen to say some of these things, because I'm not voting for anything that you're doing, I'm voting against something that they've done. But the way that this debate is, or it's articulated, is that, you know, I'm voting for you and the alternative, right? But if it's not about you and the alternative, you linking doesn't matter at all, because it's only about them. Your job is to negate. If you prove that we shouldn't try and overcome suffering, they're the ones who try and do that. You're just, you know, you might have used some problematic language, but voting negative doesn't overcome suffering, then you're in a better shape. And something that you can also do when you run Nietzsche is you should make the argument that nothing the affirmative does will be able to solve suffering anyhow, because there's no fiat. Like, plan doesn't go into existence, right? Like, there's like just a truth claim that we don't do anything in debate in terms of changing governmental policy. They don't allow for suddenly people to be able to do whatever they want and have like body or selling their organs and putting, you know, everything on that. It's just an intellectual idea. So at that point, they don't get access to actually being able to solve for the things that they want to solve for, which means that this is the perfect opportunity for us to learn to come to terms with the way that suffering operates, and then they can't leverage you're repugnant because you are saying that it's okay for trans people to be oppressed, because you're not solving trans people, which means that we might be able to have a different conversation if we were actually in like the halls of government enacting legislation. But in this debate round, neither of us could do anything. So it's a question of how do we want to orient ourselves to suffering, right? And then that short circuits our ability to leverage some of the things that they do in this debate, and I imagine that people would do in a lot of these sort of debate rounds as well. So I think that'd be useful. Also, another thing, just as a side, is that when a affirmative or a negative is based heavily on a single author, you should just do a quick internet search of that author in order to come up with some evidence that goes against them. And so, like, there's a lot of stuff that's written against Haraway for her conception of what a cyborg politics is, in terms of the way that she tokenizes women of color in that sort of relationship. So when you are making your arguments that their attempt of liberation is going to cause other forms of oppression, you could probably find a card that would go against that. And so before the round, or during prep time or something like that, you'd be like, okay, they've read 3 pieces of Haraway evidence, and like those are the longer cards, so let me just like quickly Google Haraway in Google Scholar, and you'll probably be able to find those indicts of that, or their author's name and your author's name, Nietzsche, and there will be somebody who's doing something with that. Not always, but it happens a lot, and so I know that this is one of the cases where that would take place. So yeah, that would be what I would say. And then I would also suggest for the two of you to read Kathleen Hale's. She has a lot of good books on posthumanism that gets into it.
How do you spell last name?
Hayles. How We Became Posthuman is the book I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Right, and so she goes on Haraway's analysis and then applies it in sort of in still a feminist sense, but then also very much also getting into sort of like some of the philosophical implications, and you'd be able to use that and not have an author name that is such a center as Haraway is. Yeah.
For like this summer and next year and stuff, we were thinking about like reading Species Me.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that might jive with that a little bit?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what the topic is, but like just kind of like getting into literature more. I don't know.
Yeah, she read. She also wrote a book, the Species Manifesto, and so she's got where she says that she leaves cyborgs as being the centerpiece of how to understand politics and moves to companion animals, and then it puts a focus on the way that dogs have been cyborgs and the way that humans have evolved alongside other animals means that we have morphed our bodies with animals because we've become codependent with animals. Like if you think about people with seeing eye dogs, like where does that person's body end and the seeing eye dog, begins and stuff like that. And so she has an entire, it's a short little book that's it's like the Species Companion Manifesto, which is just a cyborg manifesto in regards to species. And then she later published a book that some people with the animal rights community criticized because since there isn't a firm dividing line between species, one of the chapters is written from the eyes of a chicken that is comfortable with being ate because the chicken sees its own life as part of humans as well, and so the consumption of these animals just become a way of further bringing them into their own forms of existence. And so there are a lot of speciesist criticisms of Haraway since the publication of that book. But if you don't read those sort of chapters, you can sort of distinguish where Haraway brought that analysis to. And the Species Manifesto doesn't do that sort of work. It was like a later book where she did that on. But there's definitely a lot of overlap between that, and some within the animal rights community also like her. Because of the way that she plays with species lines and divisions and stuff like that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions from anyone?
Go ahead.
Well, mine was kind of general. It's just like, this is the first time that we've hit this argument on running this argument. So I was just curious if there's like any other kind of like way, like kind of like any other ways that we should kind of like look at it, or like what, like any other answers that we should have to it that we didn't say that might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need a better defense of why we should do things to help improve the world. Like, I think that the one answer that your app gives you that is unique that is not that other apps don't is the body modification type argument. But other than that, I think that you just need to have a better defense for why we need to do stuff and why we should care about things like oppression. Yeah. And so, like, sometimes it's hard to do that. That's why some people win nuclear war is good, is because people are not ready to defend nuclear war is bad, because they just think it is, right? And so most people just think oppression is bad, so they're not necessarily ready to defend it. But someone who's thought through the opposite end can do a better job articulating it. So you should always be ready to explain why your impacts are bad in those regards.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Do you have some?
How's our articulation of their self-infliction being responsible?
I mean, you say it is, but I'm not sure what they do that it is.
Okay.
Like that, right? I mean, like in cross-examination, which is like, well, what about my partner? What about this? There's what that actually happens, where they're inflicting upon themselves and where they cause these endless sorts of cycles of suffering. And the other way that they could do it is that when we try and solve things to make ourselves feel good that we've made the world better, it causes us to go on crusades where we're constantly doing that again and again, right? So like an analogy is like, walk on the street, you see a homeless person, they ask for money, you give them money, you're like, you feel good about yourself, and then you see another homeless person, like, okay, well, I'll give that person money, and then you run out of money because you don't have any more spare change in your pocket, but you have some in your bank account, but then you see more homeless people, and then it's like suddenly you feel bad because you can't help all these other people, so you see more and more people, and so you're inflicting resentment upon yourself, and you're having that endless recurrence of suffering by continuously trying to solve these problems and being stuck in that same sort of cycle again and again and again. So like that would be a good description of like how they would go about doing it. Otherwise, in this debate, it seems to be sort of more of an assertion of that than something else.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for debating.
Okay.